December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains across the darkened landscape, muffling the sound of tank treads and marching boots. In the pre-dawn darkness, 3 entire German armies, nearly 200,000 men, prepared for what Adolf Hitler had christened Wacht am Rhein. The final gamble to split the Allied forces and recapture the port of Antwerp. The operation represented Germany's last substantial reserves, thrown into a desperate offensive that would either save the Third Reich or destroy it completely. What the German High Command didn't anticipate was how a single American decision, made by a relatively unknown brigadier general in a snow-covered Belgian town, would not only shatter their carefully laid plans, but fundamentally alter their understanding of American military leadership forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The architect of Germany's surprise was General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, the Wehrmacht's most experienced commander, who had orchestrated the lightning conquest of France 4 years earlier. Von Rundstedt's plan was methodical and brutal: punch through the thinly held American lines in the Ardennes, race to the Meuse River bridges, and drive a wedge between British and American forces. The plan relied on one critical assumption that would prove catastrophically wrong: that American commanders would follow conventional military doctrine when faced with overwhelming force. Colonel Heinrich Brenner of the German Army Intelligence Service had spent months analyzing American command patterns. His reports to von Rundstedt painted a picture of predictable doctrine-bound officers who retreated when outflanked and called for reinforcements when outnumbered. The Americans fight by their field manuals, Brenner had written in his final assessment before the offensive. They are methodical but lack the improvisational genius of German commanders. When surprised, they withdraw to prepared positions and wait for superior numbers. This assessment would be put to the ultimate test in a small Belgian crossroads town that most Americans had never heard of, Bastogne. The town itself was unremarkable, a collection of stone buildings and narrow streets that had changed hands multiple times during the war. But Bastogne controlled 7 major roads that converged like spokes of a wheel, making it the key to movement throughout the southern Ardennes. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the battlefield. The American forces holding this vital crossroads represented what German intelligence considered the weakest link in Allied defenses. The 101st Airborne Division, commanded by Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, was not even supposed to be there. The paratroopers had been pulled off the line after the costly Operation Market Garden in Holland and were supposedly resting and refitting in France. They had arrived in Bastogne only days before the German offensive, sent north as a stopgap measure when intelligence reports suggested increased German activity. McAuliffe himself embodied everything German intelligence believed about American commanders. A career artillery officer from Washington, D.C., he had risen through the ranks during peacetime, earning his stars through competence rather than brilliance. His service record showed steady, reliable performance, but nothing that suggested tactical genius. At 46, he was older than many division commanders, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the appearance of an accountant rather than a warrior. German planners assumed he would follow standard American doctrine, establish defensive positions, call for reinforcements, and withdraw if overwhelmed. The German offensive began at 0530 hours on December 16 with a massive artillery barrage that shook the earth for miles. Over 1,600 guns opened fire simultaneously, targeting American positions across an 80-mile front. The sound was so intense that soldiers later described it as feeling like the world was ending. The barrage continued for 90 minutes, followed immediately by infantry and armor attacks that struck American positions with overwhelming force. Within hours, German spearheads had penetrated deep into American lines. The 106th Infantry Division, holding positions in the Schnee-Eifel, was cut off and forced to surrender, the largest capitulation of American forces in the European theater. Panic spread through American rear areas as reports flooded in of German tanks appearing where no Germans were supposed to be, roads clogged with retreating vehicles and refugees fleeing the advancing Wehrmacht. At his headquarters in Bastogne, McAuliffe received increasingly desperate reports throughout December 16th and 17th. German forces were advancing from 3 directions, having already bypassed or destroyed most American units in their path. His own division was scattered. The 501st and 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiments were defending north and northeast of town. The 327th Glider Infantry held the east, while the 506th Parachute Infantry covered the western approaches. They had no tanks, limited artillery ammunition, and were facing an enemy force estimated at over 40,000 men supported by hundreds of panzers. Standard American doctrine in such circumstances was clear. Establish a defensive perimeter, maintain communications with higher headquarters, and conduct an orderly withdrawal if the position became untenable. McAuliffe's superiors at 8th Corps headquarters had already given him discretionary authority to abandon Bastogne, if necessary. The town, they reasoned, was not worth sacrificing an entire airborne division. But McAuliffe was not a standard American commander, though the Germans would not realize this until it was too late. His decision-making process reflected a uniquely American approach to leadership that German military culture struggled to understand. Unlike the rigid hierarchy of the Wehrmacht, where orders flowed down from above and were executed without question, McAuliffe operated through what military historians now recognize as distributed leadership, gathering input from subordinates, encouraging initiative at all levels, and making decisions based on ground truth rather than theoretical doctrine. On the evening of December 17th, as German forces tightened their noose around Bastogne, McAuliffe called a meeting of his regimental commander. The session took place in a cramped basement that served as the division command post, lit by candles and kerosene lamps since German artillery had knocked out the power. Present were Lieutenant Colonel Julian Ewell of the 501st, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Chapways of the 502nd, Colonel Joseph Harper of the 327th, and Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sink of the 506th. What happened in that basement over the next 3 hours would confound German expectations and alter the course of the Battle of the Bulge. Rather than issuing orders from above, McAuliffe asked each commander for his assessment of the situation and his recommendations. This collaborative approach to command was alien to German military tradition, where junior officers were expected to execute orders, not influence strategy. Ewell spoke first, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over artillery fire. His regiment held the most exposed positions north of town, directly in the path of the German 26th Volksgrenadier Division. General, we're hanging on by our fingernails. The Krauts have us outnumbered at least 5-1, and they've got armor support. My boys are good, but we're fighting with what we carried in.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
No resupply, no reinforcements, no way out. Chapways nodded grimly. His 502nd was facing similar pressure from the northeast, where elements of the 2nd Panzer Division had appeared with startling suddenness. Same story here, sir. We're holding, but barely. If they coordinate their attacks, we're finished. Harper, the most experienced of the regimental commanders, had been studying German tactical patterns. They're not just trying to take the town, he observed. They're trying to bypass it. Those panzer spearheads want to keep moving west, toward the Meuse. If we can make them pay a heavy price for Bastogne, we might bog down their entire offensive. This observation would prove crucial to McAuliffe's decision. The general had been thinking beyond the immediate tactical situation, considering the strategic implications of holding or abandoning Bastogne. His West Point education had emphasized the importance of understanding the enemy's objectives, not just his capabilities. If the Germans needed to capture Bastogne quickly to maintain their offensive momentum, then holding the town, regardless of cost, could disrupt their entire plan. Cinq, whose 506th Regiment would become famous for its defense of Bastogne, provided the final piece of the puzzle. Sir, the men know what's at stake. They've seen what happened to the 106th. Nobody wants to end up in a German prisoner camp. If you decide we stay and fight, they'll follow you to hell. McAuliffe listened to each commander without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions but never revealing his own thinking. This patient, consultative style was completely foreign to German command culture, where senior officers were expected to make rapid decisions and subordinates were expected to implement them without question. The Wehrmacht valued decisiveness over deliberation, speed over consensus. When the last commander had spoken, McAuliffe stood and walked to a map of the Bastogne area tacked to the basement wall. The situation looked hopeless from a purely tactical perspective. His division was surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on supplies. Weather had grounded Allied aircraft, eliminating any possibility of air support or resupply. The logical decision, the decision that German intelligence expected, was to attempt a breakout to the southwest while such a route still existed. Instead, McAuliffe made a choice that would baffle German commanders and frustrate their offensive for the crucial days needed for Allied reinforcements to arrive. "Gentlemen," he said, turning back to face his subordinates, "we're staying. We're going to make the Germans pay for every street, every building, every inch of ground, and we're going to hold this town until help arrives." The decision violated conventional military wisdom. Allowing your force to be surrounded was considered one of the gravest tactical errors a commander could make. Military academies taught that encirclement meant defeat, unless immediate action was taken to restore mobility. Yet McAuliffe was voluntarily accepting encirclement, gambling that his paratroopers could inflict sufficient casualties on German forces to disrupt their offensive timetable. Colonel Harper raised the obvious question, "Sir, what if help doesn't arrive? What if we're on our own?" McAuliffe's response would become legendary among American forces, "Then we'll make our stand here. The 101st doesn't retreat. We've never given ground we weren't ordered to give up, and we're not starting now." This declaration reflected a uniquely American military philosophy that German commanders found difficult to comprehend. The Wehrmacht emphasized tactical flexibility and strategic mobility. When faced with overwhelming force, German doctrine called for strategic withdrawal to more favorable positions. The concept of making a hopeless stand for symbolic or strategic purposes was largely foreign to German military thinking, which prized efficiency and conservation of force. What the Germans failed to understand was that McAuliffe's decision was not emotional or irrational, but based on a sophisticated understanding of operational warfare that reflected American military education at its finest. He recognized that Bastogne's value was not just tactical but operational. Controlling the road network could force German armored spearheads to either bypass the town, leaving their flanks exposed, or stop to reduce the strongpoint, surrendering the momentum that was crucial to their offensive success. The German response to Bastogne's continued resistance revealed the limitations of their own command philosophy. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding the XLV Panzer Corps responsible for capturing the town, had expected to overrun American positions within 24 hours. When this failed to happen, he found himself in an unfamiliar situation, facing an American commander who refused to behave according to German expectations. Von Luttwitz was a veteran of the Eastern Front, where German forces had faced Soviet commanders who often made desperate stands out of political necessity rather than military logic. But those stands typically collapsed quickly when faced with overwhelming firepower and tactical superiority. The American defense of Bastogne was different. It was organized, flexible, and seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker under pressure. German intelligence intercepts revealed the confusion in Wehrmacht ranks as the battle for Bastogne dragged on. Radio communications between German units spoke of fanatic American resistance and unexpected tactical flexibility. Officers who had dismissed American military capabilities found themselves facing paratroopers who fought with a combination of individual initiative and unit cohesion that defied German understanding of American military culture. The siege of Bastogne officially began on December 20th, when German forces completed their encirclement of the town. Von Lüttwitz, frustrated by 4 days of unsuccessful attacks, decided to demand the town's surrender. The German general believed that faced with the reality of their hopeless situation, McAuliffe would accept the inevitable and spare his men unnecessary casualties. The surrender demand was delivered under a white flag by 2 German officers who approached American lines at noon on December 22. The message, written in English, was formal and threatening. The fortune of war is changing. This time, the USA forces in and near Bastogne have been encircled by strong German armored units. There is only one possibility to save the encircled USA troops from total annihilation, that is the honorable surrender of the encircled town. When the German ultimatum was translated and brought to McAuliffe, the general was taking a brief nap in his command post. Awakened by his operations officer, Major Alvin Jones, McAuliffe read the demand quickly and issued a response that would become one of the most famous replies in military history. His exact words, recorded by multiple witnesses, were simply, "nuts." Jones asked if that was the official response to be sent back to the Germans. McAuliffe, perhaps realizing that his colloquial American expression might not translate effectively, considered elaborating. But Colonel Harper, who was present during the exchange, suggested that "nuts" perfectly captured the spirit of American defiance and should stand as written. The German officers who received McAuliffe's response were initially confused by the American slang. They had expected either acceptance of their terms or a counter-proposal for negotiated surrender. The single-word rejection, combined with its dismissive tone, was completely outside their experience of military diplomacy. When the translation was finally explained to von Lüttwitz, the German general was reportedly furious at what he perceived as American arrogance and disrespect. This cultural misunderstanding reflected a deeper clash between American and German military values. The Wehrmacht prized formal military courtesy and protocol, even between enemies. Surrender negotiations followed established patterns of military etiquette that had evolved over centuries of European warfare. McAuliffe's blunt rejection violated these conventions and suggested an American approach to warfare that was both more informal and more absolute than German commanders expected. The German response to McAuliffe's defiance was swift and brutal. Von Lüttwitz ordered intensified artillery bombardments and renewed infantry attacks on all sectors of the American perimeter. German forces threw everything they had at Bastogne: Volksgrenadier divisions, SS Panzer units, and elite paratrooper battalions. The attacks came in waves, each more desperate than the last, as German commanders struggled to crack American resistance before Allied reinforcements could arrive. But McAuliffe had prepared his defense in depth, utilizing every lesson learned from 2 years of combat in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and Normandy. Rather than concentrating his forces in a single defensive line that could be breached by concentrated German assault, he established multiple strongpoints throughout Bastogne that could provide mutual support while forcing German attackers to clear each position individually. The American defensive system reflected an evolution in military thinking that German intelligence had failed to detect. Traditional military doctrine called for linear defenses, continuous lines of trenches or fortifications that prevented enemy penetration. But American commanders had learned from experience that linear defenses were vulnerable to concentrated attacks that could achieve local superiority and create breakthroughs. Instead, McAuliffe organized his defense around what military theorists now call strongpoint defense, a system of mutually supporting positions that allowed for tactical flexibility while maintaining strategic coherence. Each American position was designed to hold independently while contributing to the overall defensive plan. This approach required exceptional training and leadership at the small unit level, qualities that American forces had developed through extensive combat experience. The fighting for Bastogne reached its climax on Christmas Eve, 1944, when German forces launched their final major assault on the town. The attack began at 0200 hours with a massive artillery barrage that targeted every identified American position. For 2 hours, German guns poured fire into Bastogne with an intensity that survivors compared to an earthquake. Buildings collapsed, roads were cratered, and the town center became a landscape of rubble and destruction. At 0400 hours, German infantry and armor attacked from 3 directions simultaneously. The main effort came from the northwest, where the 115th Panzergrenadier Regiment, supported by Panzer IVs and Panthers, struck American positions held by the 502nd Parachute Infantry. Secondary attacks hit the eastern and southern sectors, designed to prevent American commanders from shifting forces to counter the main assault. The battle that followed lasted 18 hours and represented one of the most intense small unit actions of World War II. American paratroopers, many of whom had been fighting for over a week without relief, met German attacks with a combination of individual heroism and tactical skill that amazed both allies and enemies. The defense of Bastogne became a testament to American military training and leadership development at every level. Private First Class Richard Matthews of Company A, 502nd Parachute Infantry, exemplified the American fighting spirit that so confounded German expectations. When his squad leader was killed in the initial German assault, Matthews assumed command of 9 men defending a roadblock north of town. Surrounded by German infantry and facing 3 Panzer IV tanks, Matthews organized a defense that held for 6 hours against repeated attacks. Using captured German Panzerfausts and improvised explosive devices, Matthews and his men destroyed 2 tanks and inflicted heavy casualties on supporting infantry. When German forces finally overran his position, only Matthews and 2 other Americans remained alive. Even then, they continued fighting from the basement of a destroyed house until relieved by counter-attacking paratroopers 12 hours later. This pattern of individual initiative within organized resistance was repeated throughout the Bastogne perimeter. American squad and platoon leaders made tactical decisions that in the German army would have required approval from higher headquarters. The flexibility and adaptability of American small unit leadership allowed defenders to respond rapidly to changing tactical situations without waiting for orders from above. Sergeant Major William Thompson of the 327th Glider Infantry demonstrated another aspect of American leadership that German commanders found difficult to counter. When German forces penetrated American lines in the eastern sector, Thompson organized a counterattack, using personnel from the division headquarters, clerks, radio operators, mechanics, and other support troops, who would never be expected to engage in direct combat in a German unit. Thompson's improvised force, numbering fewer than 40 men, attacked German positions with such determination that the enemy withdrew, believing they faced a much larger counterattack. The incident illustrated the American military's emphasis on training every soldier as a rifleman first, regardless of his primary military occupational specialty. This philosophy created a depth of combat capability that German commanders consistently underestimated. The Christmas Day battle marked the turning point of the siege, though neither side realized it at the time. German forces had exhausted their reserves in the failed assault, while American defenders had proven they could withstand the Wehrmacht's best efforts. More importantly, the prolonged battle for Bastogne had accomplished exactly what McAuliffe had intended. It had disrupted German offensive momentum and bought time for Allied reinforcements to arrive. General George Patton's Third Army had been racing north toward Bastogne since December 19, when Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower ordered Patton to abandon his planned offensive in the Saar and relieve the surrounded garrison. Patton's ability to pivot his entire army 90 degrees and attack German forces from the south represented one of the most impressive examples of operational flexibility in military history. The relief of Bastogne came at 16:45 hours on December 26, when lead elements of the 4th Armored Division made contact with American paratroopers south of town. The link-up was achieved by Lieutenant Charles Boggess of Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, whose Sherman tanks smashed through German positions and reached the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion's roadblock on the Arlon Road. McAuliffe was in his command post when word arrived that the siege had been broken. His first reaction was typically understated, "Well, it's about time." But the relief of Bastogne represented far more than the end of a local tactical situation. It marked the failure of Germany's last major offensive and the beginning of the Reich's final collapse. The German reaction to McAuliffe's successful defense revealed the depth of Wehrmacht misconceptions about American military capability. Post-war interviews with German commanders showed consistent surprise at the quality of American leadership and the effectiveness of American military training. General von Lüttwitz, whose corps had failed to capture Bastogne despite overwhelming superiority, wrote in his memoirs that American resistance exceeded anything he had experienced on the Eastern Front. More significantly, the battle forced German high command to reassess their understanding of American military culture and leadership development. The Wehrmacht had entered the war believing that American forces lacked the martial tradition and tactical flexibility of European armies. The assumption that Americans would fight according to doctrine rather than adapt to circumstances had proven catastrophically wrong. German Army Group B Commander General Feldmarschall Walter Model, one of Germany's most capable defensive strategists, conducted his own analysis of the Bastogne battle. His conclusions, captured in documents discovered after the war, revealed a grudging respect for American military capabilities that had been entirely absent from pre-war German assessments. The American defense of Bastogne demonstrates a level of tactical flexibility and individual initiative that we did not expect. Model wrote to Hitler's headquarters on December 28. Their junior officers make decisions that in our army would require approval from division level. Their enlisted men fight with an independence that maintains unit effectiveness even when command structures are disrupted. Most significantly, their commanders demonstrate a willingness to accept tactical risk for strategic advantage that suggests a sophisticated understanding of operational warfare. Model's assessment identified the key difference between German and American military leadership that had determined the outcome at Bastogne. German military culture emphasized hierarchical decision-making and adherence to established doctrine. American military culture, forged in the democratic traditions of civilian control and individual responsibility, produced leaders who could adapt quickly to changing circumstances while maintaining focus on strategic objectives. This cultural difference extended beyond individual commanders to entire military organizations. The American military's emphasis on education and professional development had created an officer corps capable of independent thinking and creative problem-solving. German officers, trained in a more rigid system that valued obedience over initiative, found themselves consistently outmaneuvered by American commanders who refused to follow predictable patterns. The broader implications of the Bastogne battle became clear as the Battle of the Bulge continued through January 1945. German forces, having failed to achieve their initial objectives, found themselves engaged in exactly the kind of prolonged attritional warfare that their strategic situation could not sustain. The delay caused by Bastogne's resistance had allowed Allied reinforcements to arrive and organize counterattacks that gradually pushed German forces back to their starting positions, but the strategic impact was overshadowed by the psychological effect on both German and American forces. For the Wehrmacht, Bastogne represented proof that their assumptions about American military weakness were fundamentally flawed. German soldiers who had been told that Americans would not fight when faced with determined resistance now knew differently. Morale throughout German ranks began to crack as word spread of the stubborn American defense. For American forces, Bastogne became a source of immense pride and confidence. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne had faced Germany's best troops under the worst possible circumstances and emerged victorious. The battle demonstrated that American soldiers and their leaders could match or exceed any opponent when properly trained and led. This psychological boost would prove crucial in the final campaigns that brought Germany to surrender. The German intelligence failure that led to their surprise at American performance in Bastogne reflected deeper problems in Wehrmacht understanding of democratic military culture. German analysts had consistently underestimated the effectiveness of American military training and leadership development because they could not comprehend a military system based on individual initiative rather than rigid hierarchy. Colonel Heinrich Brenner, whose pre-battle intelligence assessments had so badly misread American capabilities, was captured during the German retreat from the Ardennes. In post-war interrogations, he admitted that German intelligence had focused on American equipment and unit organization while ignoring the human factors that determined military effectiveness. "We counted their tanks and artillery pieces," Brenner confessed, "but we did not understand the quality of their leaders or the spirit of their soldiers." This intelligence failure was not unique to Brenner or even to German military intelligence as an organization. It reflected fundamental differences between totalitarian and democratic military cultures that made mutual understanding extremely difficult. The German military, shaped by centuries of Prussian military tradition and recent Nazi political indoctrination, could not effectively analyze a military force based on entirely different principles. American military culture, rooted in democratic values and civilian control, produced leaders who thought differently about warfare and military organization. The American emphasis on individual responsibility and initiative, which German observers often mistook for indiscipline or lack of military tradition, actually created more flexible and adaptive military organizations. McAuliffe himself embodied these distinctly American military virtues. His willingness to consult with subordinates, his focus on mission accomplishment over rigid adherence to doctrine, and his ability to inspire confidence through competence rather than authority represented a leadership style that German commanders found difficult to understand or counter. The aftermath of Bastogne also revealed the strength of American military institutions in developing and supporting effective leadership. McAuliffe's success was not the result of individual genius, but of systematic military education and training that prepared American officers for independent command responsibility. The United States Military Academy at West Point, the Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth, and other professional military education institutions had created a generation of officers capable of thinking strategically while acting tactically. This institutional strength became apparent as the war continued beyond Bastogne. American commanders at every level demonstrated the same flexibility and adaptability that McAuliffe had shown during the siege. From squad leaders to army commanders, American military leaders consistently outperformed German expectations and often exceeded their own peacetime training standards. The German failure to understand American military strategic implications that extended far beyond the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's decision to launch the Ardennes offensive was based partly on intelligence assessments that underestimated American fighting quality and leadership effectiveness. The failure of this final gamble doomed Germany to continued fighting against impossible odds, prolonging a war that intelligent strategic assessment might have ended months earlier. Post-war German military memoirs consistently expressed surprise at American military performance during the final year of World War II. Generals who had dismissed American forces as technically proficient but tactically inferior were forced to acknowledge that they had fundamentally misunderstood their opponents. The Battle of Bastogne became a symbol of this intelligence failure and its consequences for German strategic planning. The lessons of Bastogne extended beyond World War II to influence American military thinking during the Cold War and beyond. The battle demonstrated the importance of developing military leaders capable of independent thinking and rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. American military education institutions incorporated these lessons into their curricula, emphasizing the development of critical thinking skills and tactical flexibility. Modern military historians recognize the Battle of Bastogne as a watershed moment in the development of American military professionalism. The successful defense of the town required the integration of tactical skill, operational understanding, and strategic thinking at multiple command levels. McAuliffe's decision to make his stand at Bastogne represented the maturation of American military leadership and the emergence of a distinctly American approach to warfare. The German commanders who faced American forces at Bastogne learned harsh lessons about the dangers of underestimating opponents based on cultural stereotypes and incomplete intelligence. Their experiences fighting American forces forced them to acknowledge that democratic military institutions could produce leaders and soldiers equal to or superior to those produced by more traditional military cultures. For the American military, Bastogne became proof that democratic values and military effectiveness were not only compatible but mutually reinforcing. The battle demonstrated that soldiers fighting for principles they understood and believed in could achieve extraordinary results when properly led and supported. This lesson would influence American military philosophy throughout the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. As news of the successful defense spread throughout Allied forces, McAuliffe became a symbol of American determination and tactical brilliance. His famous Nuts reply to German surrender demands entered American military folklore, representing the kind of straightforward, unpretentious courage that characterized American military leadership at its best. The contrast between McAuliffe's informal leadership style and the rigid formality of German military tradition illustrated fundamental differences between democratic and authoritarian military cultures. American military success at Bastogne demonstrated that effectiveness in warfare depended more on adaptability, initiative, and morale than on adherence to traditional military forms and ceremonies. The Battle of Bastogne ultimately revealed that German assumptions about American military weakness were not only incorrect but dangerous to German strategic interests. The Wehrmacht's failure to understand American military capabilities led to tactical and strategic decisions that accelerated Germany's defeat. McAuliffe and his paratroopers had proven that American leadership and fighting spirit were equal to any challenge, regardless of odds or circumstances. The reverberations from Bastogne echoed through German high command with devastating clarity. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, sat in his forward headquarters near St. Vith on December 30, 1944, studying after-action reports that painted a disturbing picture of American military capability. The documents before him represented a complete reassessment of Wehrmacht intelligence assumptions about their primary adversary. Von Manteuffel had earned his reputation as one of Germany's most astute tactical minds during the Eastern Front campaigns, where his panzer divisions had consistently outmaneuvered Soviet commanders through superior battlefield initiative and tactical flexibility. Now facing American forces in the Ardennes, he found himself confronting opponents who demonstrated the same adaptability and innovation that had made German armored forces legendary. The reports from subordinate commanders revealed a pattern of American leadership behavior that defied German military orthodoxy. At company and battalion levels, American officers were making decisions that German doctrine reserved for regimental or divisional commanders. This decentralized command structure allowed American units to respond to tactical developments with a speed that German forces found increasingly difficult to counter. Major Franz Kessler of the 2nd Panzer Division had submitted perhaps the most unsettling report. His regiment had encountered elements of Combat Command B, 10th Armored Division, southwest of Bastogne on December 23. What should have been a routine encounter between German armor and inferior American tank forces had turned into a 6-hour battle that cost Kessler 23 panzers and over 300 casualties. The American commander, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Cherry, had demonstrated tactical innovation that surprised German observers. Rather than establishing static defensive positions as doctrine prescribed, Cherry had organized his forces into mobile battle groups that struck German columns from multiple directions before withdrawing to new positions. This hit-and-run warfare disrupted German offensive momentum while avoiding decisive engagement on German terms. More disturbing to German commanders was Cherry's use of combined arms tactics that integrated armor, infantry, artillery, and engineering assets at the battalion level. German forces had perfected similar techniques during their early war successes, but they had assumed that American military culture lacked the flexibility necessary for such sophisticated coordination. Cherry's success suggested that American military training had evolved far beyond German expectations. Von Manteuffel forwarded these reports to Army Group B headquarters with his own analysis attached. His conclusions challenged fundamental assumptions about American military capability that had influenced German strategic planning since 1941. The Wehrmacht had consistently underestimated American adaptability, assuming that democratic military institutions would produce competent but predictable opponents who fought according to established patterns. The reality proved far different. American commanders demonstrated a willingness to improvise and experiment that often caught German forces unprepared. This tactical flexibility, combined with superior logistics and industrial capacity, created a military force that grew more dangerous as the war progressed. Von Manteufel's assessment warned that continuing to underestimate American capabilities would lead to strategic disaster. General Feldmarschall Walter Model received von Manteufel's report on January 2, 1945, as German forces began their withdrawal from the Ardennes salient. Model had commanded Army Group Center during its destruction in Operation Bagration and understood better than most the consequences of intelligence failure. His response to von Manteufel's analysis revealed the depth of German miscalculation regarding American military development. Model's memorandum to Oberkommando der Wehrmacht acknowledged that German intelligence had focused too heavily on American material capabilities while ignoring human factors. The Wehrmacht had counted American tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft while failing to assess the quality of American military education and training. This emphasis on quantitative rather than qualitative analysis had produced a fundamentally flawed understanding of American military potential. The German intelligence failure extended beyond tactical assessment to strategic understanding of American military culture. Wehrmacht analysts had assumed that democratic societies could not produce the unified command structure necessary for effective military operations. They believed that American political diversity would translate into military inefficiency and conflicting objectives among different service branches and commanders. Instead, German commanders discovered that American military culture emphasized professional competence and mission accomplishment over rigid adherence to hierarchical authority. American officers were trained to think independently while maintaining focus on strategic objectives. This combination of individual initiative and organizational coherence proved far more effective than German commanders had anticipated. The psychological impact on German forces proved as significant as the tactical implications. Wehrmacht troops who had been assured of American military inferiority now faced opponents who consistently outmaneuvered and outfought them. German soldier morale, already strained by years of defensive warfare and strategic bombing, suffered further decline as news of American tactical successes spread through the ranks. Oberpreiter Klaus Weber of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division wrote to his family in Bavaria on January 8, 1945, describing his experiences fighting American paratroopers near Bastogne. Weber's letter, intercepted by Allied intelligence and preserved in captured German documents, provided insight into how German soldiers perceived their American opponents. Weber described American soldiers as better equipped and better trained than German propaganda had suggested. More significantly, he noted that American units maintained their fighting effectiveness even under adverse conditions, something German forces had found increasingly difficult to achieve. Weber's observation that American soldiers fought with confidence rather than desperation reflected a broader German recognition that their opponents possessed genuine military capability rather than mere material superiority. The shift in German military assessment of American capabilities became evident in tactical adjustments throughout 1945. Wehrmacht commanders began modifying their operational planning to account for American tactical flexibility and leadership quality. German defensive positions were designed with the assumption that American forces would demonstrate the same innovation and adaptability that had characterized their performance at Bastogne. General der Infanterie Gotthard Heinrich, commanding Army Group Vistula during the final defense of Berlin, incorporated lessons learned from the Ardennes into his planning for the Battle of Berlin. Heinrich's defensive preparations assumed that American and Soviet forces would coordinate their operations with sophisticated understanding of combined arms warfare and operational mobility. Heinrich's respect for American military capability was shared by other German commanders who had faced American forces during the final months of the war. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, defending southern Germany against advancing American armies, acknowledged in post-war interviews that American tactical leadership had exceeded German expectations throughout the 1944 to 1945 campaigns. The German military's evolving assessment of American leadership reached its culmination during the final surrender negotiations in May 1945. German officers who met with American counterparts to arrange capitulation were struck by the professional competence and tactical knowledge displayed by American commanders at all levels. The informal but effective American command style that had so confused German observers during combat proved equally impressive during the complex logistics of military surrender. General Alfred Jodl, who signed the German surrender at Rheims on May 7, 1945, later wrote that American military professionalism during the surrender process demonstrated the same quality that had made American forces so effective during combat operations. American officers combined technical competence with practical flexibility in ways that impressed even defeated German commanders. The post-war analysis of German military records revealed the extent to which Wehrmacht leadership had misunderstood their primary opponent. Documents captured from German high command showed consistent patterns of underestimating American military capability based on cultural stereotypes and incomplete intelligence. These misconceptions had influenced German strategic planning throughout the war, contributing to decisions that ultimately hastened German defeat. German military memoirs published after the war consistently expressed surprise at American tactical innovation and leadership quality. Generals who had dismissed American military tradition found themselves acknowledging that democratic institutions could produce military leaders equal to those produced by traditional military institutions. The Battle of Bastogne became a symbol of this intelligence failure and its strategic consequences. The lessons learned from German encounters with American leadership influenced post-war military thinking in both countries. German military professionals studying at American institutions during the 1950s brought with them hard-earned respect for American tactical flexibility and operational capability. This mutual respect contributed to the effective partnership between former enemies during the Cold War period. For American military institutions, the German assessment of their leadership effectiveness provided valuable external validation of military education and training programs. The fact that professional German officers had been surprised by American tactical capability suggested that American military development had succeeded beyond expectations. This confidence influenced American military planning during subsequent conflicts throughout the 20th century. The cultural clash between German and American military traditions at Bastogne revealed fundamental differences in how democratic and authoritarian societies approach warfare. German military culture emphasized hierarchical authority and adherence to established doctrine, while American military culture encouraged individual initiative within organizational frameworks. The American approach proved more adaptable to the rapidly changing conditions of modern warfare. Military historians studying the German reaction to American leadership effectiveness have identified several factors that contributed to Wehrmacht intelligence failure. German observers focused too heavily on American material resources while ignoring the human factors that determined military effectiveness. They assumed that democratic military institutions would produce predictable, doctrine-bound opponents rather than flexible, innovative leaders. The German military's belated recognition of American leadership quality came too late to influence the war's outcome, but provided valuable lessons for future military planning. The experience of underestimating opponents based on cultural assumptions became a cautionary tale studied in military academies worldwide. The Battle of Bastogne demonstrated that military effectiveness depends more on leadership quality and tactical flexibility than on traditional military culture or formal ceremony. The transformation of German military assessment regarding American capabilities represented one of the most significant intelligence reversals of World War II. Wehrmacht commanders who had entered the war believing in American military inferiority were forced to acknowledge that their opponents possessed genuine professional competence and tactical innovation. This recognition came through hard experience rather than theoretical analysis, making it all the more credible and influential. Modern military analysts studying the German response to American leadership at Bastogne have identified lasting implications for military education and training. The battle demonstrated that effective military leadership could emerge from democratic institutions and that tactical flexibility often proved more valuable than rigid adherence to established doctrine. These lessons influenced military development programs throughout the Cold War period and beyond. The legacy of Bastogne extended far beyond its immediate tactical significance to reshape understanding of military leadership and institutional effectiveness. The battle proved that American military culture could produce leaders capable of matching or exceeding any opponent when properly trained and supported. This realization influenced both German and American military thinking for generations, establishing principles of leadership development that remain relevant today. The German generals who had dismissed American military capability before Bastogne were forced to acknowledge their fundamental error in assessment. Their belated recognition of American leadership effectiveness represented not just a tactical adjustment, but a profound shift in understanding how democratic societies could organize for military success. The lessons learned from this intelligence failure would influence military planning and assessment for decades to come, ensuring that the price paid for German misconceptions would not be repeated. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.